All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us for our panel today. My name is Eileen Graham. I'm from the Smithsonian's Office of Fellowships and Internships. I'm excited to be here today to join you and my panel here to talk about the next generation in preservation. So our panel thought that we would try and capitalize on the virtual aspect of our gathering here today and try a couple of tricks that are available to us. So let's see, I'm gonna share my screen first. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to structure our talks in hopefully a engaging way. So we'll have so we have 4 panelists. We're going to do 2 pairs of very quick talks, followed by a little bit of a discussion between the panelists, and then we will open it up to audience questions and answers at the end. So in order to keep things snappy and moving along, we're going to be using kind of the style of Pachacacha to really emphasize with images and stories the things that we're trying to convey and hopefully keep you all engaged. So in addition to the quick nature of it, we will also be using the polls feature. So hopefully you've got a poll up available to you right now, and it's going to ask you who you are, what sector of the field do you represent. So we want to make sure that our community is, or that we know who our community is, and we can tailor our discussion to appropriately address some of the things that are important to you. To that end, we of course are also interested to know what things are on your mind, what topics are of interest to you, what questions you have. So there should be a question submission box available to you throughout the presentation. Please feel free to submit as you think of things. No need to wait until the end. We will keep an eye on the questions there and try to address as many of them as we can. All right, so moving along. All right, and I've got the results of the first poll here, so I'll just mention them quickly. So it looks like we've got 1/4 of the attendees are early career professionals, 1/4 of them are industry experts, and almost half of them kind of identify in the amateur preservationist and enthusiast category. So thank you all for joining us. All right, moving right along. Okay, so I wanted to kind of set the stage for us here when talking about the next generation and take a step back and really kind of contemplate where we're going. And this is kind of where we're going in our careers, right? And it can be really hard to tell, especially when you're just starting out, that your career is not going to be in a straight line, and it's not going to be just a segment of your life. It is a significant portion of just life's journey overall. And a lot of times it's not described to us in that manner. So it's really, it can be a struggle to really figure out how all of these pieces fit together, how your new interests, how new challenges, as you acquire them over time, you get more experience in different things. How do you take all of that information that's coming at you, not linearly, not in an easy to understand sort of way? How do you balance that all to ultimately make sure that you do have a career when it comes down to it? So we talk about this career path, and it really is, I think can be a disservice as we consider how we're moving through life, how we are trying to put together something that makes sense for us, but then also something that makes sense for the industry that we end up working in. So I wanted, the goal is to be realistic about this and make sure that people are properly set up to ultimately be successful in their careers and in their roles. So if we're not talking about a career path, kind of really what are we talking about? And and so it's something that we want to make sure that the career, both the personal understanding of the career, but also the industry and the discipline understanding of the career, is that it really is going to be impacted significantly by different parts of people's lives. And the way that you come to a career or build a career is never going to be the same between different people. Your journey is going to be unique, and how do you make sure then that the discipline that you're focused on is, or how do you make sure that you're going to be successful in that? So, just to make sure that that we're all aware that without fail, your career is going to include things that are totally non-career related, right? You're going to be growing in different ways. Sometimes you're going to view your career as the thing that's taking the most focus. Other times you're really just going to be making sure that you can still put dinner on the table and you're able to care for your family and things like that. But all the while, time doesn't stop, your career doesn't stop, even if it's not the preeminent thing that you're focused on. So how do you take all of that experience that you're gaining and make sure that you can turn it into to valuable experience for your career? So to that end, I think it's always important to kind of take a step back and reevaluate kind of where your career is, where it's balancing, where it is it's going. It might be different now than it was, last year, 2 years ago, and making sure that ultimately you're being deliberate about how you're progressing through your career journey. But sometimes, even if you take a step back and reevaluate and you know exactly where you want to go next, it can sometimes feel like the deck is stacked against you, especially when we're talking about traditional metrics or traditional educational paths, that sort of thing. If you've taken a step off the traditional path, how hard is it to get back into it? So to that end, we want to make sure that we set up the conversation here to include multiple groups that are represented. So to the industry experts, to the university representatives, the mentors that are out there, what kind of barriers do we see as far as welcoming folks in and making sure that we're fostering a good environment for anyone who wants to come and join the discipline? How can we ensure that the diverse range of experience that we know human beings on the whole will acquire over their life? How do we make sure that that experience, be it particularly relevant to the discipline, be it tangential, be it potentially unrelated, how are we valuing that in the candidates that come before us? And then, of course, to the next generation. So what kind of barriers do you see as far as being successful in your careers? What factors have caused you to waver in pursuing your passions, right? Sometimes you can be really sure of what you want, but you don't necessarily know how to go about it and get it. And then ultimately, I think the question is, what led you to embark on this particular career journey when you did, right? Timing is everything. So what is it about this particular moment or the moment you made that decision and decided that it was going to be a worthwhile endeavor for you? What was it about that moment and those particular variables and parameters that all came together to set you on this current trajectory? Again, just a reminder that the career journey is really unique to each one of us. There's no right way or wrong way to go about it. Things might be harder, more difficult, more challenging, but ultimately it's the path that you choose, and your choice and your dedication to it is absolutely one of the most important things along the way. So with that, I want to invite all of our panelists to introduce ourselves. And what we're going to do is just give a little bit from each one of us about how our careers evolved and what our journeys included to really illustrate the diversity of ways that you can get to where you are today, right? Because that's all we can really talk about. So for myself, I actually started out as a marine biologist, which is a far cry from a lot of the topics discussed during this symposium. But I do find myself using a lot of the skills that I gained during that degree and applying them to a completely different discipline. So mostly I develop internship programs and development programs for early career professionals here at the Smithsonian. It's ultimately, I took a traditional education path because at the time in the sciences, it really did feel like if I took a step off the path that I would be, it would be almost impossible for me to get back on. Whether or not that's true or not, right? It's a variety of parameters that ultimately result in where you end up. But I chose to stay on the science path and stuck with it for a while, ended up here at the Smithsonian, and found myself really lucky, I think, because this organization really values interdisciplinary collaboration and the ability to kind of move between a variety of topics here within the organization. So, am I a mentor and advisor? Sure, absolutely. Am I a marine biologist? By training, absolutely. Am I a program manager? Yes. But, it kind of all depends on the day how I identify myself. So with that, we'll go through the rest of our panelists. So we'll start with Zumilena.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Zumilena Den. I am the Preservation Manager of Weeksville Heritage Center. I'm going to say that I'm a proud Brooklynite who grew up in the neighborhood of East New York, in Brooklyn, New York. And in my position at Weeksville, I oversee and manage the construction projects, as well as the maintenance of the historic Hunterfly row houses, which are the only residential remnants of the historic neighborhood of Weeksville, which was one of the largest and one of the first free African-American communities of the 19th century. Before coming to Weeksville, I worked in the architecture firm Michael Ibenhoe McCall in Brooklyn, New York. And it was during this time that I connected with preservation and decided to found my organization, Preserving East New York, which we call PENNY for short. And PENNY is a community organization that advocates for the protection of the unprotected historic buildings within the neighborhood of East New York, which is a Black and Brown community.
Hi, I'm Sarah Marsom. I'm a heritage resource consultant based in Columbus, Ohio, but I have the pleasure of working across Turtle Island, or North America as we call it today, with a wide variety of organizations ranging from political action committees to private corporations to individuals to nonprofits to government entities, museums, and more, because I believe preservation and the power of history can be infused into any type of entity. My background actually starts with an undergrad in Parks and Rec Management, though, and I've had just quite a journey of exploring how cultural resources connect to our broader communities, landscapes, urban environments, and beyond. Some of my greatest hits include Tiny I Am Pei and Tiny Jane Jacobs. My work has been featured in the National Park Service's LGBTQ theme study. I've been featured in Curved and Traditional Building magazine. I've just had the pleasure of working to, like I said, infuse the past into our communities in a wide variety of ways, because this isn't a one-size-fits-all movement.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, next up is Milan.
Hi, so I'm Milan Jordan, and my background is actually architecture. And what drew me to architecture was a passion for homelessness. So at its core, it was a human right interest turned physical. I do love design and space and materiality, but if I think back to the core value that led me down this path, it was the people side of things. Given that my interest was secondarily the physical piece, I didn't last long in the design realm and quickly shifted to the industry scale. prior to being at the National Trust, I was at the American Institute of Architects, and I helped with licensure resources for aspiring architects and career resources for young architects as well. So it brought me back to the people. But at that very national level, I did miss the grassroots experience and then entered Hope Crew, which is my current role at the National Trust. And I direct the program, and it's the Trust's main program on trades. Trades are anything like masonry, carpentry, the people who deal with the actual historic materials and fixing and helping out historic buildings. So HOPE is an acronym as well. It stands for Hands-On Preservation Experience. And the program's designed to diversify and repopulate the preservation trades through the vehicle of creating short experiential learning segments, largely coupled with youth corps around the country to get diverse populations interested in the trades at a younger age. So we all find such winding career journeys, and our hope is to let talent know that this career is an option earlier on. So I'll stop there with my journey, but because that's where we presently stand. But I look forward to talking a little bit more about the trades in my piece.
Thanks, Milan. All right, and lastly, Christine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Henry, and from the slide, you see that I'm at the University of Mary Washington. So I actually teach undergraduate historic preservation classes. And as an academic, I did not get here through the normal path. Most scholars sort of go directly to teaching out of graduate school. I had a couple of different stints in graduate school. I started off actually on the architecture path as well. And I found out sort of halfway through architecture school that I wasn't much of a designer. I was more interested in issues of sustainability, actually. And I got more involved in sustainability and preservation as it moved on. Then for a while, I was a federal grants administrator for a federal agency that works with museums and libraries and helped folks in their communities figure out how to make their communities, more involved in what they do. Ultimately, I went back to school and got another degree in preservation and then my PhD in order to be able to teach, because my favorite part of every position I ever had was being able to help people make connections and help people figure out how to express what they want. And so that's what I get to do now. I get to help students in my programs, not just students who are majors, but as I'll talk about a little bit more, students across our campus who are just a little bit curious about preservation and hopefully make lots of those enthusiasts like half of the audience is here. So I look forward to talking with you all more.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we will start off with Zumilena's presentation. So if we can also have her poll question go up about engagement in local preservation while she's talking. So Zumilena, it's all yours.
In 2015, two things were happening within the community. One was that a beloved East New York unprotected historic building was going to be demolished. And even though the community fought to save it, nothing could be done at this point because the demolition permit was in place and it couldn't be revoked. The other part of the story is that the same year, the New York City mayor was discussing about starting revitalizing 15 neighborhoods in New York City through a rezoning plan. Through this plan, it would incentivize the demolition of short buildings for taller ones. And for East New York, this looked like demolishing mostly 4-story high buildings for 12-story ones. And this led me to think about what would it look like for East New York to go through this rezoning where it's a large neighborhood, it has more than 20,000 properties, but only 3 of its historical buildings are just protected. So for many years, East New York has suffered from city has suffered from neglect from city initiatives, but the community's will has kept the neighborhood alive. And with these drastic changes coming to the neighborhood, it made me think about what tool could we use that would give us the continual power about the changes that will happen in an ever-changing neighborhood. And this also made me think about how some of the building owners and developers are not currently from the neighborhood, and any changes that they would propose to their properties will not be felt by them, but by the residents of the neighborhood, the people that make East New York, East New York. So one of the tools that I thought that could give us the power was preservation. And this led me to start Preserving East New York, to start the conversation and bring awareness about why preservation in the hood matters and why it is beneficial to us. Even though we fought hard against the city to help include a preservation agenda within the rezoning plan, the city approved the rezoning plan in 2016 without a preservation agenda. This was we felt really defeated, but we felt that it was our opportunity to do the groundwork. So we started an educational plan and started hosting events where we could bring the community together and connect the people to the history of the neighborhood. And this came in the form of tabling at the farmers market, which is the heart and soul of the neighborhood during Saturdays. We did walking tours. We try to connect people with history in the neighborhood through events that felt that were unconventional. So we hosted a heart bombing, which is, arts and crafts session to bring community together to cut paper hearts and target a specific building to show them love for Valentine's Day. We also hosted a funeral service for a building, which we fought hard to save, but we couldn't. It is important for us to show the faces of who Preserving East New York is, which is made of members who are Black and Brown. It's important that our communities see our faces because this shows how preservation is for us and by us. And here we see preservation and its power. This, due to our advocacy work at the farmers market, we were able to collect petitions signed by the community to support the designation of the Empire State Dairy. This is the 3-story building you see in the front of the taller building. And thankfully, the building received designation by the time that developers and architects came together to build a new building on the site. And in the first initial proposal, which is on the left, you can see the very light brick color with monotonous window pattern. And on the right, you see the consequences of our comments. In the initial proposal, we felt that the new building didn't connect well with the existing historical building because of the difference of the color of the brick. And also, we felt that it stood out within the neighborhood, where in our neighborhood, the color scheme is composed of warmer toned brick buildings. And we wanted that new building to have a connection and not feel like a parasite landing in our neighborhood, to take over and sort of be a visual representation of the new changes that were coming that were not favorable to the community. And the second, at the slide to the right, we show the building where, the architects went back into the drawing board and they changed the color of the brick. You can also see a difference in the window design, where initially our concerns with the first plan was that the building resembled a correctional facility in the city, and for our neighborhood, who has been suffering an attack with a bad reputation of being one of the worst neighborhoods of New York City, filled with crime, we felt that this was a no-no for us. So they had to go back and sort of change the design of the windows, change the color background, and also work with improving the design that will fit most for the community. And in this slide, I just want to highlight that, within the rezoning plan, before it was actually approved, the city did a study to analyze all the buildings that would be impacted by the rezoning, and also the buildings that were landmark worthy at the moment. And even though the city knew the consequences that this plan would cause within the neighborhood, they decided not to landmark the building, and they move forward with knowing that. Our work now is to continue doing our awareness campaign and make people aware that these buildings are very vulnerable and need the protection. And we're just continuing to do our work and hopefully bring forth the community and to support this work we just want to continue doing the work and hopefully designate all these buildings that were left vulnerable by the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Zumilena. All right, Sarah.
So, hi, everyone. Again, thank you for having me be here. It's a pleasure to be a part of the Women in Preservation Symposium. So about 10 years ago, the young preservationist movement really started to gain momentum across the country. Most people attribute the Buffalo Young Preservationists as the first group, but there are groups all over the country that are organized and led by next generation preservationists. And these began largely in response to the existing constructs that our preservation and history groups have that create inhibitors from joining their board or joining a committee, looking for specific skills, looking for specific amounts of money. So young preservationist groups emerged in an effort to give next generation community advocates, recreational and professional, the ability to have a voice in the changes of their community and decisions of what's preserved. So I helped co-found the Young Ohio Preservationist in 2014, and then a couple of years later helped co-found the Rust Belt Coalition of Young Preservationists, which at its peak had 10 groups from around the Midwest region. And what these groups really impressed onto me is that when we are cultivating the next generation of preservationists, some of them may be like Chris Myers on the photo on the left, who's a historic preservation planner for his city, but other may be like Nimi Shabat, a visual arts librarian for an academic institution. We need to make sure that we are utilizing preservation as a way to help connect to people through joyful activities like parties in old logger cellars, or advocacy workshops, so that our preservation toolkit isn't just limited to people with specific types of degrees. We need to be cultivating these next generation folks through a myriad of activities, moving beyond the walking tour, moving beyond an exhibit. Let's connect to people in a variety of ways, because all of us connect to the past in a different type of way. So a really fun activity from 2019 was at the Park Central Mall in Phoenix, Arizona, the earliest mall in Phoenix, built in 1960. And during this event, the mall was in the midst of a remodel, an event in the midst of a reactivation, thanks to a new light rail transit reactivating that area of Phoenix. So the developer was curious, would this space potentially be viable as a maker space? So that was one audience to engage. Other audiences engaged were people who wanted to learn how to sew, and other audiences engaged were people who wanted to learn about the history of women in the mid-century modern textile movement, how women were really prevalent designers of these textiles that became iconic. So, this event, we got to test out this vacant storefront, teach people a skill, teach people about history, but create multiple touchstones that could engage a much broader audience than a standard walking tour or something along those lines, and also empowering people by giving them a new skill. These people now all could sew their own pillow, create a happy home good. And after the event, we enjoyed watching Pillow Talk, the famous Doris Day and Rock Hudson movie, sitting on our pillows in that open atrium space. So something fun, something out of the box to engage the broadest community possible. And women have been using craft for hundreds of years to have a voice. Craft is a wonderful way to connect people to the physical and intangible aspects of our past. And last year, with the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, with the acknowledgement that not all people could vote in 1920, not all people could vote until the 1970s, and we even struggle today, I had the pleasure of hosting virtual and in-person workshops across the entire country to help people know how voting rights activists passed this amendment. And it was women crafting banners, crafting these large textile pieces, cultivating an entire marketing campaign using specific colors and verbiage to be advocates for themselves. And these participants, we weren't just talking about the past. We were talking about voting rights issues or human rights issues that exist today, and how we can be activists for our communities, learning from the past to benefit the present. And as you can see from these images, participants may create something whimsical to just bring a smile to their face, because after all, self-care is a radical act. Or other people created pieces just to encourage people to vote. This reached such wide demographics, again, because I wasn't just hosting preservation activities or storytelling activities with a history mission-centric nonprofit. I was doing this with everything from private corporation to art museums, because again, the past is interwoven into all aspects of our communities. And I like to jokingly call myself the history art teacher. I teach some art history, but I like to use art as a way to connect people to the past. So this created the Tiny Activist Project with Tiny Jane Jacobs in 2017 and Tiny I Am Pei in 2019. Whimsical little dolls to tell stories of people who influenced the built environment. And these dolls have been used as storytelling tools by museums, or in the center image, you can see the Cleveland Public Library uses Tiny Jane as a way to teach urbanism to small children. But the dolls weren't just a storytelling technique. I am a young person with a limited budget that I can donate to organizations. So I wanted to find a way that I could have a project that brought me joy, told stories, but also allowed me to garner funds to give back to the community. So initially, the Tiny Activist Project created tiny conference scholarships for people with big dreams to help them attend the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I thoroughly enjoyed helping support 15 people attend the National Trust Conference thanks to doll sales. But last year, in lieu of giving conference scholarships for people to attend virtual events, I used doll sale money to host Dismantle Preservation, an event with over 1,000 people live streaming conversations on mental health, unions, on how we can expand the narrative, on all facets of implicit bias and struggles in preservation movement. And these 1,000 people from more than 30 states and over 4 countries, these people didn't just work in preservation. These were students. These were all types of demographics, people who just wanted to expand their preservation toolkit. But this wasn't just an event. This was an advocacy effort for us to really start to have more open conversations about money. We have limitations to get into preservation, with many jobs requiring a master's degree as a minimum qualification. We have salaries being hidden and not included in job descriptions. So how can you even know if it's worth investing into a master's degree if you don't know how much you'll make at the end of the day or at different points of your career trajectory? So Dismantle Preservation included a labor equity campaign, which continues today. And we convinced 4 job boards and 1 preservation digital community to change their job board limitations so that now they require compensation information and they no longer allow unpaid internships. Our work has a value, and if we don't financially support people at their start of their career with paid internships for entry-level positions, and if we hide salary information, we are going to continue to perpetuate wage gap between genders and race. So it's really important that we have conversations about money for what cultural resource work is worth. And I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Great, thanks, Sarah. All right, so I'll also invite Zumilena to pop back on the screen. So just a couple of questions for you both. I'll start with Sarah. So Sarah, you talked a lot about a variety of different interconnectivities between the preservation field and a wide variety of other things, right? So how do you see kind of the engagement differing if folks are trying to engage with young folks, say school-age children, versus someone who might be coming into it after already starting down a different career journey or coming to it a little later in life? And how can we be effective at engaging kind of folks on both sides of the main schooling spectrum?
There are some really basic steps that we can do. Things as small as stop using acronyms. Acronyms create language limitations that can make people feel excluded. So it's some small steps like that, so that we can, just by saying what NAGPRA is, the Native American Graves Repatriation Act, instead of saying the acronym, we can help people feel included and, subtly train them as a part. It's really, in my mind, recognizing that a lot of us don't come to preservation when we're 16. I had no clue preservation was a career path when I was choosing my college major. So what are our opportunities to create engaging educational opportunities? So one of my favorite workshops, and you saw that on my first slide, is letterpress making. So we're supporting a small business by learning how to letterpress, but our workshop is teaching people how to write public commentary, how to be a public testimony expert, and teaching them the languages to engage in the public process. But, we do it from a bit more of a whimsical entry point to a very serious topic. And those workshops, every time they've been hosted, have sold out. And again, you just kind of lure people in with a little bit of fun, and then you go deep dive serious.
Excellent. I like the sound of that strategy. All right, back to Zumilena. So you talked a lot about the struggles in your neighborhood. I wanted to ask kind of if you were going to be kind of mentoring someone to set up a similar organization, what roadblocks might you suggest that they should watch out for as they're kind of going down the very functional path of trying to help preservation?
I'm going to say that even though pretty much I know everyone here believes that preservation is like the best thing in the world, right? You will find people, especially those that you would expect to support the support from, to be against it. And it could be very disappointing. Also, you may find that you can't find the people to join your cause. So, I would suggest, you can start the group with one person, which is what I did. I basically started a group, and it was like a one-person show in the beginning. And I remember when I made Penny public, I was reached out by a local newspaper, and during the interview, they joked about, this group is not a one-person group, right? And they started laughing. And then in that moment, I was like dying inside, because I'm like, I cannot reveal the secret. I know there will be people that will join. I just continued doing my work on my own and started testifying and presenting at community gatherings, and like little by little, I found like-minded people to join Penny. And another issue that I ran was like in the initial stages of Penny, I was expecting to get support from a local representative, but he was against the plan, the preservation plan and the mission of Penny, because he thought that we were going to use preservation to kind of like make the rezoning feel appealing to others. And this moment was pivotal for me in understanding that, preservation is not understood by many, and there's a lot of misconceptions. And the tool to kind of like make people understand it is education. Education is the perfect tool to spread the word, and you just have to continue doing the work. And slowly but surely, people will start noticing and understanding, the tool, the powerful tool that is preservation.
Great. Just a quick follow-up question for you. I was curious if even in your one woman show sort of stage, did you have counterparts in other cities that do that run similar organizations or community groups to Penny, that you were able to kind of build a more distributed community among, get some advice from?
When I started on my own, I didn't know what to do, even though I worked in architecture. Advocating for buildings and protecting them through landmarks designation was a complete, total, like different animal for me. Luckily, I have reached out to a city planner, and they told me that they couldn't help me with my initiative, and they forwarded me the information of the Historic District Council, which is a nonprofit, and it's the citywide organization that helps neighborhoods and people to protect their historical resources. So I reached out to them, and they've been such they've been such an important organization to the growth of Penny. We call them our landmarks fairy godmother, because they're always there to support. And without them, it would have been a slower process for us.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, great. All right, thank you both, Sarah and Zumilena. We will move on with the next couple of talks and then circle back to everyone. So next up will be Milan and her poll question on participating in the trades.
Okay. Most people have not participated in a trades training program. That's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about now. And I will try to do a better job of stating that preservation trades are things like skills that steward the built environment, like masonry, carpentry, mortar repointing, properly painting historic materials, the skills we need to care for our historic building stock. And there are a whole slew of professionals around the country who are trained in that, and they are who we rely on when we need to care for historic buildings. Okay. So I'll start off with a common example that highlights the need for and shortage of skilled trades labor, and that's in the event of a natural disaster. This photo is the aftermath of Hurricane Hugo on Charleston, South Carolina, a common case study in preservation. I'm going to read an excerpt. A disaster such as Hurricane Hugo, which devastated Charleston in 1989, dramatically illustrates that conservation of the built environment is fundamentally dependent on the skill and availability of the men and women who do the actual physical work of preservation. In the weeks following the storm, the shortage of tradespeople with the knowledge and skills to repair the historic building fabric of Charleston's older buildings quickly emerged as one of the greatest challenges of the rebuilding effort. And that's an excerpt from Lisa Sasser in the piece titled, "Why the Trades Matter for Preservation." So we have a demonstrated need for preservation trades. Now let's look at a contrasting, curious phenomenon. Although underrepresented groups such as women represent a huge part of the labor pool, they are not always welcomed into the construction industry. Regarding participation of women craft workers, a study conducted by the National Women Law Center indicated that the percentage of women in construction trades has remained almost the same from 1983 to 2010. This creates a major contrast between the jobs in the construction industry and other industries regarding gender diversification. In fact, the percentage of women in many occupations that used to be more male-dominated have increased during the same time period, being 1983 to 2010. Meanwhile, construction trades pay better than many job opportunities for women, and they could be attracted into the industry if contractors could provide a better work environment, it's stated. This study also discussed that increasing female participation in construction craft occupation is one of the quickest solutions available to the industry to reduce its skilled workforce shortage. And I promise I'm actually not trying to beat you over the head with women's imagery, but this was coincidentally the exact image that was used in the Architects newspaper when the American Institute of Architects launched their advocacy campaign, which was titled Know Your Worth. And as I mentioned in my intro, I used to work at the American Institute of Architects prior to the trust, and my colleagues created this campaign. And it was an effort to do away with unpaid internships in the architectural licensing process. It actually had nothing to do with women's pay equity, this specific campaign. But it was all about dignifying the pipeline to licensure. And that's a piece of what I'm talking about here, is that there are various perceptions around construction trades, of which preservation trades are a subset. It's thought of as a low-brow, low-skill labor, and anyone who knows anything about the preservation trades knows that that's exactly opposite of the case. In pursuit of attracting women and diverse youth to the trades, we need to dignify the work in a way that people recognize. We live in a consumer society where your dollar is your voice, so we need to steer clear and far away from the message that unpaid labor sends. And Hope Crew pays all of our participants and trades experts, so it's a major piece of trying to get people interested in the trades, because it's not a concept that translates to all communities, bestowing dignity but not pay. So if we want people to understand that the trades are a very dignified and highly skilled labor source, paying people is very important. Another piece that's very important is meeting people where they are and equal access. In the pursuit of diversifying the trades pipeline, we absolutely need to meet people where they are. And humorously, these photos are not where these students were, but there's a story. This is from a Hope Crew partnership segment with the National Park Service and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. where we lead students in a project on the trades on their campus, and then also bring them out to Grand Teton, Wyoming, which is where they are partially pictured here, where they learn the cultural significance of those buildings and some building trade skills. And they also get to travel to DC to network, meet other architects, and learn about the historic sites there. And the story here about meeting people where they are is that we start with and on the HBCU campus, and many of these students who've never left the state until this project now get a chance to. We can't just host a fancy project in a metropolitan area and expect diverse populations to show up. We have to meet people where they are and help them step out. And that brings me to my last point, which is that diversifying and repopulating the preservation trades is that it's really important to roll in upward mobility. And that's ensuring and communicating that the trades can be a vehicle for upward mobility. To some of the public perception that I spoke of before, a potential public thought is that the trades are lowbrow, low skill, stagnant profession, which kind of does harm to ensuring that more people of color enter the trades. We work with trades experts through the HOPE crew who are business owners, entrepreneur leaders. They travel, they set their own schedules, their workflows. There's absolutely mobility in the preservation trades. And it's our responsibility to shift the narrative around this meaningful work to attract bright youth, because that's what people of color and historically underserved groups want. They want upward mobility, and letting people know that the trades is a vehicle for this is an important part of the narrative that can make us feel good about bringing in diverse populations and women. And that's it. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to be part of this panel and to hear all of the wonderful things that all of the other panelists have been talking about. I'm going to kind of take it a step back and talk about undergrad classes in preservation and how that works. So I teach at the University of Mary Washington, which is a state liberal arts school. And we have a major in preservation, and that is great. And we have, students who graduate every year who go on to work in the field. But I also teach intro level preservation classes to almost 80 students in a couple of different classes every semester. Only a small portion of those ever intend to be preservation majors, right? Some of them take it just because, it fits into their schedule, and then they get the bug and they end up majoring. But a lot of them are really just doing it because it helps them broaden their education, or they have a friend in the department, or they're just kind of intrigued by the topic. And so why not? And my feeling is that those students are the ones we really need to capture, because we're not just doing preservation as professionals for other preservationists. Preservation is a community activity, as all of the other panelists have talked about. And so my goal is to inspire all of those students in my classes to find something that they can relate to. I joke in my intro to architectural history class that I'm going to teach them how to speak the language of architecture, and then I want them to go out and bore their friends and family by sharing their knowledge with them. And every year I get somebody who says, "You're absolutely right. I couldn't stop talking about this incredible gable that I saw." And my parents said, "Wow, you're really excited about this." And that's wonderful. That's what I'm trying to do, is get everybody to look a bit deeper at their environment and try to figure out what that means for them. So I kind of try to do this in 4 different ways. First of all, I try to make it accessible. And by that, I mean, we do all kinds of fun activities where we certainly take advantage of all of the public sites that we have here in Fredericksburg, where the university is located. This is a historic city. We have lots of museums. The museums are wonderful and welcome us all the time. We also have a historic downtown. And so we take advantage of that as much as possible. And what I try to do is not only show them kind of the methods and the scholarly work behind preservation, but also challenge maybe some of the stories that they've had about communities, and really get them to think deeper about what stories we're telling and what stories we're not. And then I really try to make it as relevant as possible to them. And so this is a series of pictures of different topics that I talk about in my intro level classes that I do go on to develop in upper level classes for those majors. But, we start off with an oral history project in my intro preservation class, and we have all of our students pick somebody, whether it's a family member or just a friend, and have them talk about a building that the person interviewing has never seen, and ask them to reflect on it and what it meant to them and what it looked like, and explore this idea of the emotional as well as the physical aspects of our built environment and why we might want to preserve things. I also talk a lot about sustainability. And as you can see from the central image, not all buildings are saved. And I talk about what that means in our greater society and for environmentalism. And lots of students, it's interesting, preservation sometimes forgets how closely linked we are with the environmental movement. And lots of students are surprised to make those connections. So we talk a lot about that. And that's an issue that a lot of my students are particularly interested in. And then finally, some of you may have been familiar with this image on the far right. So this is one of our local historians talking to my class about what was called the slave auction block, which was in downtown Fredericksburg. And it has as you can imagine, troubled history of whether or not it should be kept in the urban landscape. And we eventually, a couple of years ago, really got interested in rethinking this idea of should it be here, why or why not? And I got my students directly involved, not just in talking about this in the classroom, but this is my next point of making it participatory. So I got my students to go to the community meetings, to think of themselves as they are for 4 years as part of our local community in Fredericksburg, to talk to local folks about what this means and to really see how that community process works. These were incredible workshops where the city had hired the International Sites of Conscience to run focus groups open to anyone to talk about not just that one site, but the broader interpretation of how we interpret history and how we share stories in Fredericksburg. And so students got to see how messy and how challenging and how so many sides are presented in these kinds of things, and how to keep communities engaged and how to actively really rethink what it means. And that's also what I have on that right-hand side, is I take even the intro level students to our local community architectural review board meetings, and they have to analyze cases and understand the local government process. And it's funny because I often tell them at the beginning of the class, students usually think this one sounds like the most boring assignment and they really don't want to do it. And almost universally, students say it was so much more interesting than I thought, and I'm really excited to learn more about local government. So ultimately, I'm trying to make preservation both more specific and more broad, and get more people interested in all aspects, whether it's professional or enthusiasts. And then finally, I like to make it fun as possible. So we do things like scavenger hunts and we explore buildings, and you can see my students actually making truss bridges. And then of course, what fun would it be if we just made them? We get to destroy them too and have a contest out of it. And I also teach a class on road trips and Americana. And so I get students to broaden their idea of what they think preservation is and how they might participate. I always say that it'll be a great success if I have a business major who falls in love with preservation, but continues on in their business career. They leave school, they start their own business in a historic downtown, and they have an appreciation for the history wherever they started, and they share those stories with their patrons, right? I mean, that is success to me. It's not that I don't love creating new historic preservation professionals, but I also love engaging the broader community in what it means to preserve stories, what it means to keep rethinking what stories we tell, and challenging all of those kinds of things. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. All right, and Milan, please join us. Okay, so I wanted to start off just by asking Milan, and this also popped up in our Q&A about other programs that might be out there that deal with trades and the support kind of in that realm. Someone specifically asked about a school in Charleston, and we have another comment. So I believe this is probably the same, unless there's more than one. The American College of the Building Arts in Charleston. So if who else, what else is happening in these fields?
Yeah, there's a wide array of things happening, which I'm grateful for. There are some national level task force. There's two that I'm on right now. One is convened by the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. It's the Traditional Trades Training Task Force. Another one is a Trust Task Force, and it's called the Preservation Priorities Task Force. We both have some landscape studies going, which are looking at higher ed programs, 2-year degree colleges, things that train people in the preservation trades. Historic Corps is another one. So there's a lot of local initiatives, and then there's also some national sort of policy level things that are going on that are trying to across the board advocate for the preservation trades. And we're trying to make that symbiotic process like kind of coalesce. So we're looking at the national level and trying to like percolate up some of the grassroots ideas and take some of these national ideas and infuse them down to the local level. But I believe at some point in the future, we'll release a landscape study, of which I'm sure there are plenty out there, but it needs constant refreshing, because despite the need for the preservation trades and trades training, a lot of programs still go out of commission. And we have some ideas about why that might be, if there's not a champion or if the person who started the program leaves, but there's such a need and sometimes a gap to meet that need. So if you don't keep up with these landscape studies and keep refreshing them, there's new programs that exist and old ones that have gone away, but there are a good number around the country that we hope to be able to release some more data and information around.
Great, thank you. And then Christine, we talked a little bit about this in our pre-session plannings. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of the complementary aspects of undergraduate preservation versus graduate preservation education.
Yeah, so I teach at Mary Washington, and we have the largest undergraduate program in the country. We have lots and lots of grads that go on to do lots of things. But as we were talking about in our pre-planning and lots of conversations, it is a roadblock that so many of our jobs require a master's degree, right? So many in the field. And so trying to strike that balance between how do we get students kind of entry-level jobs, and then, if they need to go on to more education. I think it's a big challenge. And I think that's why I particularly focus on trying to get all students interested in preservation, right? Because we need folks both outside of the field to appreciate, the skills that preservationists have, and also to get folks within the field to be able to kind of expand their knowledge while they are in a career, right, and get on the job kinds of experience. So it is a real challenge. There are not a lot of undergrad programs. I think in my ideal world, there probably be lots more undergrad classes in preservation. We don't need a ton more majors, right? But we need lots more people to see how it's relevant to all kinds of different disciplines and all kinds of things that they do.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions in here that I think really the answers kind of hinge on that knowledge base, right? And making sure that the field, and then how the wide variety of ways that one can engage with the field are better known, so that when someone comes across it and thinks that they have a significant interest in it, they're actually able to find additional information to get themselves on, whether it be a career element for them or just that further interest as as an enthusiast and lifelong supporter of the of the discipline. So, all right, I'll also invite my other two panelists to just pop back on camera, and we'll do a couple more Q&As here. So, it's very clear from hearing you all talk and then seeing some of the questions that we've got here that that passion is a really significant portion of this field, of this discipline. And so then there were a couple questions kind of about how do you actually balance that? So, when something is your passion and your career, you can often kind of traipse over that work-life balance line. Kind of on the other hand, it can be potentially a really great way to engage folks, as Sarah was describing, with things that might not be inherently preservation related, right? If you're learning new skills and kind of bringing in the intangible elements. So I guess the question kind of being how. What all is your perspective on being able to carve out a good portion of your career energy for this? Right, that's a fairly esoteric question. So, and I don't really know who to direct it at. Maybe we'll start with Sarah.
Great question. As someone who likes to stay busy, I've definitely had a hard time recognizing that I shouldn't be a preservation history nerd 24 hours a day, that I need to figure out what that balance is. I can't work all the time because then I won't stay fueled. So what I've done the past few years is re-exploring hobbies that I did in the past that have just dropped to the wayside. So like you all know I sew dolls. Okay, let's just not, what else can I sew dolls? So like I sewed my shirt, like exploring things that I'm interested in new directions, and taking classes so that I'm intentionally doing that. This year, for example, my reading goal is to alternate a history or preservation-centric book with a fiction or a graphic novel, making sure that I'm very intentionally creating that balance, but I truly think it enhances. So, like nothing's worse than taking a tour of a historic house and then be referencing like Gunsmoke or something really outdated reference. By me watching Bravo reality shows, I now can reference how Southern Charm talked about Confederate monuments this season. So, you can find really like even these outside things, I find them connecting to my preservation work in some way, but also allowing me to have some mindless entertainment sometimes.
I was going to say almost the exact same thing as Sarah, probably not as humorously, but one thing that is always important is just to remember yourself or any others that you're mentoring as whole beings. Like we all are so multifaceted. I think if I had a career right now that wasn't in preservation, wasn't in the built environment, I would absolutely be volunteering in it. I would be a docent. I would be figuring out some way to balance it out. And I think keeping all those other breadcrumbs of the path you followed in mind, and finding volunteer opportunities, civic opportunities, leadership, mentoring, teaching others in it is just like such a great way to keep us all well-rounded. And like Sarah said, I've never found a hobby of mine that didn't in some way positively benefit the larger picture. Whether it's I have a stint in YouTube videos, have a small business, and they all come together for the greater good, and are really good at stopping us from just working 24/7 on one thing and just becoming drones. Just remembering our layers is so important.
Great, thank you. So kind of on the concept of getting engaged and if you're not on the career track, being able to educate yourself or express your love of this field in a variety of ways. Zumilena, I'm curious of the community that you're building, how, kind of what's the percentage on folks who who see themselves in the field professionally versus kind of these other avenues to participation in preservation that we've discussed as far as, community folks who just are really passionate about the built environment, or, historic preservation, kind of with the group that you've got, kind of what's the breakdown?
The breakdown, I'm gonna say specifically for my neighborhood, many of us haven't had the acknowledgement of preservation. So it's just community people, organizations, stakeholders in the neighborhood, but most of us didn't come from a preservation background. I didn't. I realized when I started Penny that initially, when I fell in love with historic preservation during high school in Dominican Republic, I thought that it was architecture, because I didn't know that historic preservation was a field, a career choice for me. So when I decided to major in something in college, like I thought about the moment that I connected through the Colonial zone in Santo Domingo. And I thought, I want to do architecture that will last forever. Because I didn't know that what I had fallen in love was actually historic preservation. And through my job, working, renovating buildings, and working with the Black community that surrounded the office, like it made me understand preservation and the power that it has within the community. And I wanted to kind of create that same sentiment within my childhood neighborhood. So I'm dealing with just, people that don't have any background or don't have any knowledge or have some interest in historic buildings, but don't particularly know that, that interest is connected to historic preservation. So, as I'm working with Penny, we're making the term be, I guess, it's like a new concept within the neighborhood. So now people are understanding what it is and how they're already connected to it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions that kind of hit on this concept of both interconnectivity, but also awareness of the field. And we've mentioned this a couple of times. So my question here is going to be, if we as a group are trying to be exemplary in how preservation can be both. Preservation as a discipline can be both advocated for, but can also be expanded as or awareness about it can be expanded to be both a field that you can go directly into and get your education that way, but also really help people understand, as Christine was saying, how a business major with a preservation, couple of classes, or a political science major with preservation experience. How do we get out there to the schools, to the university advisors, to the national organizations, and actually push that message back down to really hope to capture a larger swath of the next generation?
Well, I think I'll jump in first here and say this is something that we have been talking about in our department for a while, is how do we get, local high schools to understand that this is a possibility, right? That this is, and I always say that preservation is a field rather than a discipline, because it takes a whole bunch of different disciplines to do preservation, right? Like you can't really just do one part of it. There's so many different skill sets that we need in order to do it. And so we are trying to reach out to our local high schools, but I know that that's one of the things I think about is like, how can we make sure that people understand that whatever background they have and skills they have, there's probably a way that if they're interested in preservation in the past, that they can integrate that in, whether it's as a volunteer or ultimately as a career. Yeah, I saw somebody's question in the Q&A about, people didn't even understand that political science was, useful for preservation. And oh my goodness, of course it is, right? And so, I'm always trying to, when I talk with either interested students or with high school counselors or things, really talk to them. First I get them in about like we have these cool digital toys, right? Like preservation isn't all old stuff. We have all kinds of new technologies that they can learn, but also that people coming from all different aspects. It isn't just of interest to us, but it's essential for what we do as preservationists, right? We have to have people who have hands-on skills and people who are great at math and people who are great at PR and, all of those things, because otherwise preservation doesn't work. So yeah, I don't know. I'm sure my fellow panelists have other thoughts.
Go ahead, Sarah.
It's also tied, though, realistically, cultivating K through 12 or college, that's long term. So what can we do short term? And that's reassessing our qualifications for our jobs. Landmark Illinois, a statewide nonprofit, Old Salem Museum and Gardens, one of the oldest historic preservation organizations in the country, both of them have eliminated academic qualifications from their job descriptions. And they have both said that has opened up the pool of applicants to so many wonderful backgrounds that they may not have previously considered. So short term, I think we need to be advocating for changes in our job descriptions and our qualifications.
I agree. I also think there's a mindset shift that needs to happen, which is that the next generation is everybody's responsibility. It's not just for people who teach K through 12 or teach college or institutions. One great example I saw recently, the National Trust has another program, a larger umbrella called the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, and they were doing an HBCU campus stewardship program. And a lot of the HBCUs, I can't think of any that formally did, maybe one, didn't have preservation programs, but the charge to the applicants was still to figure out how to involve students with this campus stewardship plan. So they had to come up with ideas to roll business students in. Is it your arts program? Is it your entrepreneurship school? So teaching the next generation is just not only the responsibility of teachers, we all have this responsibility to repopulate preservation trades and beyond the larger preservation field. And I think the more we can find synergies between programs and see them as learning opportunities is a great way to make sure that people know about this from where they are.
Great, thank you. All right, let's see. We probably have time for a couple more questions. I guess let me hit on this very specific one because I'm curious about it too. So Milan, this was directed to you. I'm wondering if it's got broader applicability as well. So do you see opportunities for trade training within Biden's new infrastructure plan? And I think I would expand that to, is preservation represented in the infrastructure plan?
Both ways that question is formed, yes. That we have a large government relations and advocacy team, and a lot of those task force I mentioned they're focused on the policy and national level. So that's really what they're looking at, is figuring out how to carve out preservation's piece in the infrastructure plan. But within our current administration, they also have a lot of interest in HBCUs. So rolling in more diverse populations as well too. But the infrastructure piece, for certain, it's exactly the type of thinking we're thinking about, because the built environment is infrastructure, and that's exactly the types of things they're targeted: Black and brown communities, poor policies that have led to highways through communities, bisecting them, and trying to undo those things is exactly where the trades can fit in, and also hopefully in repopulating more diverse trades as well too. So total alignment there.
Great, always good to hear. Just to kind of circle back to kind of the funding piece and the paying for internships or jobs related to this, is there funding in that plan available for these training types of programs? Do you know?
There definitely is. I think the main hinge is just trying to make sure that preservation is called out. It's a larger infrastructure plan and people have various definitions and they may see it more as construction and other fields. And our piece of this advocacy pie is making sure that the trades get a part of it and that it's called out and understood through public understanding that trades are a part of infrastructure, because if people don't understand that, we don't get a part of it. So a little bit of public teaching, but there's a lot of funds in there for that.
Yeah, great. All right. So I think that is the spirit of most of the questions that have been submitted. So I want to thank my panel. Are there any other topics, any other things that y'all have been thinking about during the discussion that you want to raise for the group?
I really like this one question from Maddie on what's our one piece of advice to young adult and interested in joining the preservation workforce? I'd love to hear what the panelists' one piece would be. I'll start. Send cold emails and calls to people who you think are doing cool work. Like, I do that myself even. I'm now 31. I'm entering mid-career. So I started reaching out to people with 10 to 15 years more experience than me last year so I could learn more about what they've done as I plan my career trajectory. So it's always worth having a half-hour call with someone, and don't be scared to reach out to someone who you think is doing interesting work.
Mine would be similar, and it would just be to always keep your eye out for mentoring, and that peer-to-peer mentoring is absolutely a thing too. Sometimes it can be hard to catch the ear or attention of somebody who's 60 years into their career, and there are amazing people who you can learn from who are within your own cohort as well. So just learning from those around you, using everybody as a resource is it's A1, and it will lead to such a strong foundation.
I think, in this day and age with technology, we're all connected, and social media could be a powerful tool. You can slide into someone's DM and ask them about, their work. I've had a couple of people that have messaged me on Instagram, and we set up Zoom meetings to meet virtually and just talk about each other's work. Don't be afraid of reaching out. The people in preservation are like the most amazing people. So just don't be afraid, reach out.
I guess my one piece of advice might tie back to Eileen's kind of introduction to the panel about this idea that your career path is probably not going to be a direct line. And so I'm often telling my students, expand not only what you think you want to do, but where you think you want to do it, and really be open to opportunities that you might not have thought were the right fit, and see how that goes, because you might surprise yourself. So I would say, kind of expand your looking for positions really broadly, and define preservation as broadly as you possibly can. And then also know that it might take a little while to get into the field, and that's okay. It won't seem so long once you've done that, but the job search can take a bit of time to find the right fit.
Great. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today for our discussion. Thank you to the panelists for their insight and their leadership within the field. We have enjoyed speaking with you, and I hear it's lunch break next, and enjoy the rest of the symposium. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to you for moderating, Eileen.
You bet.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.